Hello and welcome to my channel Secrets and Lies. John and Linda had been married for 25 years. They had seen it all, raising 2 children, welcoming 3 grandchildren, and navigating the ups and downs that come with a quarter-century of marriage. Their life in the suburbs of Cleveland was comfortable, if not a bit predictable. One evening, as they sat on their porch sipping iced tea, Linda turned to John with a contemplative look. "John," she began hesitantly, "I've been thinking." John chuckled. "Should I be worried?" She smiled faintly. "I think we should take a vacation." He raised an eyebrow. "A vacation? Sure, sounds good. Where to? Florida? Maybe visit the grandkids in Texas?" "Well," she hesitated, "I was thinking we could take separate vacations." John nearly choked on his tea. "Separate vacations? Isn't that called a divorce?" he jested. She laughed lightly. "No, silly. Just a little time apart, to explore ourselves individually." "Linda, the last time I explored myself, I threw out my back reaching for the remote under the couch," he quipped. She rolled her eyes. "I'm serious, John. We've been together since college. Maybe it's time we each did something on our own." He looked at her thoughtfully. "You need a break from me?" "No, not a break, just a breather. Think of it as hitting the refresh button," she explained. John scratched his head. "Well, if you think it'll help, where were you planning on going?" "I've always wanted to visit Napa Valley," she said drily. "The vineyards, the wine tastings, the scenery. Sounds fancy," he noted. "I suppose I'll head up to Lake Michigan for some fishing." She smiled. "That sounds perfect." A week later, they stood in the airport, ready to depart on their separate adventures. "Don't catch all the fish," Linda teased. "And you don't drink all the wine," John shot back with a grin. "Deal," she agreed, giving him a peck on the cheek. "See you in a week." "Enjoy your self-discovery," he said, winking. Linda arrived in Napa Valley and was immediately captivated by the rolling hills and endless vineyards. On her second day, she joined a wine tour group. As she admired the lush grapevines, a voice with a British accent spoke beside her. "Beautiful, isn't it?" She turned to see a tall, silver-haired gentleman with twinkling blue eyes. "It really is," she agreed. "I've never seen anything like it." "First time in Napa?" he inquired. "Yes. I'm Linda, by the way." "Pleasure to meet you, Linda." "I'm Richard." They spent the rest of the tour chatting effortlessly about wine, travel, and life's little pleasures. "So, what brings you to Napa?" Richard asked as they sampled a Pinot Noir. "Oh, just taking some time off," she said vaguely. "A fellow soul on a journey," he mused. "I came here to escape the hustle and bustle of London." Over the next few days, Linda and Richard bumped into each other repeatedly, at the local cafe, the art gallery, and even the farmer's market. "It's like we're on the same itinerary," Linda laughed. "Perhaps fate is telling us something," Richard suggested playfully. They decided to have dinner together at a quaint restaurant overlooking the valley. The conversation flowed as freely as the wine. "Tell me about your family," Richard prompted. Linda hesitated. "Well, I've been married for 25 years, 2 kids, 3 grandkids." He looked surprised. "Grandkids? You don't look old enough." She blushed. "Flattery will get you everywhere." He raised his glass. "To new friends and unexpected adventures." "Cheers," she smiled, clinking her glass against his. As the evening progressed, Linda felt a spark she hadn't felt in years. She enjoyed the attention, the novelty, the sense of being seen anew. Meanwhile, up at Lake Michigan, John was having his own adventure, or lack thereof. "Hey there, buddy," said a fellow fisherman on the pier. "Catch anything today?" John looked into his empty bucket. "Just a cold." The man chuckled. "Name's Bill." "John," he replied, shaking his hand. They spent the afternoon swapping fish tales and bad jokes. "So, what brings you here?" Bill asked. "My wife and I decided to take separate vacations," John explained. Bill raised an eyebrow. "Trouble in paradise?" John shrugged. "Not really. She wanted to explore herself. I think she's been watching too much of that Oprah." Bill nodded sagely. "Women. My ex-wife once went to a yoga retreat and came back wanting to become a vegetarian. That lasted about a week until she smelled bacon." John laughed. "Linda loves her bacon too." "Well, here's to fishing and freedom," Bill toasted, raising his soda can. "Cheers," John grinned. At the end of the week, Linda returned home. John was already there, unpacking his fishing gear. "Hey, how was Napa?" he asked, hugging her. "It was enlightening," she replied. "Enlightening? Did you find yourself?" he teased. "Maybe I did," she said softly. He noticed a distant look in her eyes. "Everything okay?" "John, we need to talk," she began. His stomach sank. "That doesn't sound good." She took a deep breath. "I met someone." He blinked. "You met someone? Like a guy?" "Yes. His name is Richard. He's from London." John stared at her in disbelief. "So, while I was freezing my butt off catching nothing but a head cold, you were what, romancing James Bond?" "It's not like that," she insisted. "We just connected. He made me realize things about myself." "Like what?" "That you prefer tea over coffee," he snapped. "John, please, don't make this harder than it is," she said, her voice trembling. He threw up his hands. "I'm trying to understand here, Linda. We've been married 25 years. We have grandkids." "I know," she said, tears welling up. "But I feel like we've been on autopilot. I need more." "More what?" "More wine tastings?" "More British accents," he retorted. She shook her head. "I need to feel alive again." He looked at her, a mix of hurt and frustration. "So, what are you saying?" "I think we should separate," she said quietly. He sat down heavily on the couch. "You're serious?" She nodded. "I am." He rubbed his temples. "Well, I guess those were some powerful grapes you had out there." "John, don't." He sighed deeply. "What about our family? Our life here? I'll always cherish what we have, but I can't ignore what I felt," she explained. He looked up at her. "And what did you feel?" "That there's more to life than what we've settled into," she said. He shook his head. "I can't believe this." "Maybe in time, you'll understand," she offered. He stood up. "Well, I suppose I should have taken up wine tasting instead of fishing." She managed a small smile. "Fishing never was your strong suit." He chuckled despite himself. "You're right about that. Remember that time I tried to teach the kids and ended up hooking my own shirt?" She laughed softly. "I had to cut you out of it." They stood in silence for a moment. "So, what happens now?" he asked. I think we should take some time apart," she suggested. He nodded slowly. "If that's what you want." "It is," she affirmed. He took a deep breath. "All right then." As she turned to leave the room, he called after her. "Linda." "Yes," she paused. "For what it's worth, I hope you find what you're looking for," he said sincerely. "Thank you, John," she replied, a hint of sadness in her eyes. Over the next few months, they began the process of separating their lives. Their children were shocked but supportive. "Are you sure about this, Dad?" their son Michael asked one afternoon. "I'm not sure about anything anymore," John admitted. Bill from the fishing pier called one day. "Hey, buddy. Heading back to the lake this weekend?" John hesitated. "Actually, I might try something different." "Yeah? Like what?" Wine tasting, John said with a hint of mischief. Bill laughed heartily. Now that's something I'd pay to see. John decided to take a trip to Napa Valley himself. Perhaps he needed his own journey of self-discovery. At a vineyard, as he awkwardly swirled a glass of Chardonnay, a woman next to him commented, "First time? Is it that obvious?" He grinned. "Just a bit," she said, amused. "I'm Margaret." "John," he replied, shaking her hand. "Well, John, let me show you how it's done," she offered. They spent the afternoon sampling wines and sharing stories. He told her about his fishing misadventures, and she shared tales of her travels. "Maybe fishing isn't your thing," Margaret suggested. "Tell me about it," he chuckled. "Have you ever tried cooking?" she asked. "My kids used to say my grilled cheese could double as a paperweight," he confessed. She laughed. "Well, there's hope for you yet." As the sun set over the vineyards, John felt a sense of renewal. Back home, Linda was adjusting to her new life. She kept in touch with Richard, but the distance made things complicated. One day, she received a letter from him. "Dear Linda, our time together was wonderful, but I've realized that my home is in London and yours is in Ohio. Perhaps our paths crossed to teach us something about ourselves. Wishing you all the best. Richard." She sighed, folding the letter thoughtfully. Months later, John and Linda met to discuss finalizing their separation. "You look well," she commented. "Thanks. I've been trying new things," he said. "Like what?" "Wine tasting, for one," he smiled. She raised an eyebrow. "Really?" "Yep. Met someone who showed me the ropes," he said casually. "That's great," she replied, a hint of surprise in her voice. "How about you? How's Richard?" "He's back in London. We decided it wasn't going to work," she admitted. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said sincerely. They sat in silence for a moment. "John, do you ever think about us?" she asked tentatively. "All the time," he nodded. "We had a good run." She looked down. "Maybe we were hasty." He considered her words. "Perhaps. Or maybe we needed this time to grow individually." She met his gaze. "Do you think there's a chance we could start over?" He smiled gently. "Linda, we can't erase the past, but maybe we can write a new chapter." She smiled softly. "I'd like that. On one condition," he teased. "What's that?" "You teach me how to appreciate good wine," he said. She laughed. "Deal. And you can teach me how to fish." He chuckled. "I wouldn't subject you to that torture." They both laughed, feeling a warmth they hadn't felt in years. John and Linda decided to give their marriage another shot. They realized that while adventures and self-discovery were important, so was the history and love they shared together. They explored new hobbies, traveled to new places, and continued to poke fun at each other's quirks. One evening, as they sat on their porch sipping a bottle of Napa Valley's finest, John raised his glass. "To unexpected detours," he toasted. "And to finding our way back," Linda added, clinking her glass against his. "Cheers," they said in unison, smiling at the road ahead.